The rain against the windows of Ravenmore Hall sounded, to Mireille Coville, like the distant tapping of someone trying to be let in. She paused on the third-floor landing, a basket of folded linens braced against her hip, and listened. There was no one. There was never anyone in this part of the house. That was the rule. The east wing was sealed, the corridor beyond the carved oak door forbidden to all staff except Mr. Yarrow, the old steward, who passed through it once a fortnight with a ring of keys at his belt and a face like a closing door. She had been at Ravenmore for 16 days. 16 days of waking before dawn in a narrow attic room that smelled of beeswax and wood smoke, of polishing silver she would never eat from, of moving like a shadow through corridors lined with portraits, whose painted eyes seemed to follow her with the same suspicion the living staff did. She was new. She was young. She was, in the housekeeper Mrs. Pell's withering assessment, too pretty by half and too quiet by far. So she said little. She watched. She did her work. And she stayed clear of the east wing until tonight. The candle in her hand guttered as a draft she could not locate moved through the corridor. She had been sent up by Mrs. Pell to deliver freshly aired bedding to the green guest chamber on the second floor. She had done so. She had turned to descend. And then she had heard it. A sound. Not loud. It came from somewhere above her, somewhere on the third floor, in the part of the house that did not officially exist. A soft wooden thud, the kind of sound a frame makes when it slips from a wall. She should have ignored it, but her feet carried her up the next flight against every instruction she had ever been given. The oak door at the end of the third-floor corridor was open. Not wide, not flung, just not closed. A finger's width of darkness between the door and the jamb, and from that darkness, a thin, cold air that smelled of dust and old varnish and something faintly metallic, like rain on iron. She pushed the door. It swung inward without resistance, on hinges that had been recently oiled. That detail, more than anything else, undid her. Someone has been here. Someone has been here often. The corridor beyond was unlike any she had seen in the house. Smoke blue silk on the walls, faded but still beautiful. Narrow planks of dark wood underfoot. No portraits, no mirrors, only 6 doors. The sound came again. Closer. The third door on the left. The brass plate read, in flowing script, still room. She knew what a still room was. A small private chamber where the lady of a house had once prepared cordials and salves. But Ravenmore had no lady. The Duke's mother had been dead for 9 years. The door was unlatched. She pushed it open with the back of her hand and stepped inside. The room had been a still room once. The shelves still held glass bottles, some sealed with wax, and labeled in a careful sloping hand. Valerian, lavender water, tincture of arnica. But it was no longer a still room. It was a room someone had been hiding things in. A desk piled with papers. A long oak chest with iron clasps. A brass-bound trunk shoved hastily under the window. And against the wall opposite the desk, leaning at an angle as though it had only just slid down, a large rectangular shape covered with a sheet of gray cloth. It was the sheet that had fallen, she realized, not the frame. The cloth had slipped halfway down, exposing the upper third of what was beneath it. And what was beneath it stopped Mireille's breath in her throat as cleanly as a hand clapped over her mouth. It was a portrait. A young man stood at the center of the canvas, painted in the soft golden light of an afternoon she could almost feel on her own skin. He wore not the heavy black mourning the present Duke wore, but a dark green field coat. His hair was a little long, the brown of wet earth, falling across his forehead with the careless grace of someone who had not yet learned to be guarded. He was smiling, not broadly, not for the painter. The smile was for someone the painter could not see, someone standing, perhaps, just beyond the easel. With a softness so naked Mireille felt herself flush and turn her face away, as though she had walked in on an embrace. She made herself look back. She knew that face. She had passed it on the stairs only that morning, when the Duke had descended in his black coat to take his coffee. She had pressed herself against the wall the way the staff were instructed to. He moved through Ravenmoor the way a man moves through a room he means to leave forever, never quite touching anything, never quite looking at anyone. His face had been thin and severely set, the mouth held tight as a clasp, the eyes the color of slate after rain. The man in the painting was the man he was. The same eyes, the same jaw, the same mouth, only smiling, only soft, only alive in a way the Duke of Ravenmoor hadn't been alive in any moment since Mireille had first laid eyes on him. The man who had sat for it had not yet learned to hold his face like a fortress. She lifted the candle. The light fell across the lower portion of the painting. He was not alone in it. There was a hand, just a hand, painted at the edge of the canvas, resting on his green sleeve. A woman's hand, slim, with a thin gold ring on the smallest finger. The rest of the woman was hidden by the fall of the cloth. Who you were, she thought, looking up at the painted face. Who were you before? Behind her, very quietly, the door of the stillroom closed. She turned so fast, the candle flame nearly snuffed itself out. The Duke of Ravenmoor was standing in the doorway. He had not made a sound coming up the corridor. He stood now with one hand still on the latch, and his face was the face of a man who had walked into his own grave to find someone already digging. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The Duke's eyes went past her to the half-uncovered portrait, and something happened to his face that she would remember later as the most terrible thing she had ever witnessed. A flinch so small it was almost nothing, and behind that flinch, in the slate-gray eyes, a look of such raw, exposed grief that she understood all at once, and without being told, that she was the first living person in nearly a decade to have seen what was behind that cloth. When he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. "Who," he said, "let you in here?" Her mouth had gone dry. The candle in her hand was trembling so badly, she could see the shadows of the bottles on the wall jumping like small, frightened animals. He stood between her and the only door, and though he was not a tall man, there was a stillness about him that took up the whole room. "Your Grace," she managed. I heard a sound. I thought a window had blown open in the storm. I did not know this room was. I did not know." His eyes had not left the painting. "Cover it," he said. She set the candle down on the edge of the desk, with hands that nearly betrayed her, crossed to the painting, and drew the gray cloth gently up over the green-coated shoulders, over the smiling mouth, over the painted eyes that had been alive and were now hidden again. When she turned back, the Duke had stepped fully inside the stillroom and closed the door behind him. The latch made a small, definite sound. "What is your name?" "Mireille Coville, Your Grace." "How long have you been at Ravenmoor?" 16 days, Your Grace." He said nothing for a long moment. He was looking now not at the painting, nor at her, but at the desk, at all the careful evidence of a private life he had clearly believed. Until this hour, no living soul in the house knew about. She watched his face and saw him calculating, not what to do with her, what to do with himself. "Whom have you told?" "No one, Your Grace. I came up only minutes ago." "Why would you not tell anyone?" There were a dozen reasons that would have sounded like flattery, and one that was the truth, that the look on his face when he had walked into the room had unmade her entirely. "Because it is not mine to tell, Your Grace." His eyes came to her then, truly to her, for the first time. They were not slate. They had only seemed to be. They were a warmer gray, and there was something at the back of them, a tiredness so deep it was almost a kind of patience. "How old are you, Miss Covell?" 22, Your Grace." "Where are your people?" "My mother is dead. My father is in Hartleyford. He is a clockmaker. He is not well." "Why did you come so far?" "Because the wages are higher here." He received it with the smallest tilt of his head. Then he said, with the air of a man reaching a decision he did not particularly want to make, "Sit." There was no chair, save the one behind the desk. She crossed to it and sat. He went to the window, drew back the heavy curtain a finger's width, and looked out at the rain. When he spoke again, his back was to her. "I am going to tell you something. I am going to tell you, because you have already seen what I have spent 8 years keeping out of sight, and there is therefore very little left to protect from you. In 4 days, my aunt arrives at Ravenmoor with a young woman of good family, whom she intends to install as my wife by the end of summer. I have refused this match 3 times. My aunt is not a woman who accepts a refusal she has not personally given." He turned from the window. "There is also a gentleman expected, a Mr. Hollincourt. He has reason to believe I am unfit to manage the estate. He intends, during the visit, to gather such evidence as will allow him to petition for a guardianship of the title's holdings on grounds of unsound mind. He is not entirely wrong. I have given him grounds. I have not appeared in society in 4 years. The household has been managed by Yarrow, because I have not had the will to manage it myself. If Hollincourt comes here and finds a master who hides in his own east wing, he will have what he needs." He stepped away from the window. "I require, for the duration of the visit, the appearance of a man who is not what I have been. I require, in particular, that the upper floors of this wing be opened, aired, and made plausible, without my aunt or Mr. Hollincourt ever setting foot in this room or knowing it exists. You are the only person in this house who has seen the painting and knows what it is. You are therefore the only person I cannot afford to send away, and the only person I cannot afford to keep ignorant. Mrs. Pell is loyal, but she gossips. Yarrow is loyal, but he is old and slow and will be watched. The understaff cannot be trusted because they have already been bought once by Hollincourt's people. You are new. You came here for wages, and wages are a thing I can offer you in quantities you have not imagined." She understood, slowly, what he was asking. "I wish you to become, for a fortnight, my eyes and my hands in this house, to take your orders from me directly and from no one else, to lie when lying is required, with a face that does not give you away. In exchange, I will pay you a sum that will buy your father a physician for the rest of his natural life, and a house in any town in England you care to name. Your Grace, I am a housemaid. They will know. They will see what I tell them to see. I will give it out tomorrow that you are to be elevated to the position of my late mother's lady's companion in waiting, a title vacant since her death. You will move out of the attic, and when the visit is concluded and Hollincourt has returned to London empty-handed, you will be released with the sum I have promised, to whatever life you wish to make. And if I refuse, then you will leave Ravenmoor tonight with a quarter's wages and a letter of character, and you will tell no one what you saw in this room, because I will trust your word that you will not. I will not threaten you. I have not the energy left for threats." She looked at him. The candle was burning low. Why me? Truly. Not the convenience of it. The truth. He considered her. "Because when you uncovered the painting, you put the cloth back without my asking." That was all he said, but she understood it. "I will need to think, Your Grace. You may have until tomorrow at noon." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. "There is one further thing. You will not lift that cloth again. Not once. Not for any reason. Even if I ask you to." She did not understand that. Not then. But she said, "Yes, Your Grace." And he opened the door, and he was gone. She sat for a long time afterward, listening to the rain and to the small, uneven sound of her own breathing, looking at the gray cloth that hung now perfectly straight over the secret of the man she had agreed, in all but words, to serve. She did not sleep. She lay in her narrow attic bed and turned the Duke's offer over in her mind, the way she had once watched her father turn a broken watch, looking for the place where the spring had slipped. She could not find one. The sum he had named, even unspoken, frightened her by its largeness. She thought of the painted hand at the edge of the canvas, the gold ring on the smallest finger, and the smile of the young man in the green coat. He has been alone with that picture for 8 years, and tonight a stranger walked in on him with it. He should have dismissed me on the spot. He did not. By breakfast, she had made her decision. She had also made her terms. She did not see him at the morning meal. She ate her bread and her thin tea in the kitchen with her eyes lowered, and she heard the news already passing along the long table from Mrs. Pell's seat, at the head down to the scullery girls at the foot. His Grace had a notion in the night. There's to be a companion's place opened up. The new one, the Koval girl. The eyes came to her then, all at once. She did not lift her own. When breakfast ended, Mrs. Pell summoned her with a single hard syllable, "Koval," and gave her, in a voice flat with fury, her instructions for the day. New room, 2nd floor. A box of clothes had been sent down from the late Duchess's storerooms. "You'll forgive me," Mrs. Pell said, "if I don't yet understand by what miracle you have risen so far so fast." "There has been no miracle, Mrs. Pell. I will work hard. I will not give you cause for complaint." Mrs. Pell looked at her a long moment, and Mireille saw, beneath the fury, a flicker of fear. She is afraid I will displace her, Mireille thought, and was sorry for it, and could not say so. The new room was not large, but to Mireille, it was a palace. A real bed with a curtained canopy. A window that looked east onto a kitchen garden, bordered by espaliered pear trees. The box of clothes contained 3 day dresses in plain, dark colors. Wool, not silk. A heavy shawl, soft leather slippers, and a set of fresh linen of a quality her hands had never before been permitted to touch. She did not weep. She had not wept in 7 years. But she sat for a moment on the edge of the bed and thought of her mother, who had died before any softness in life had ever come to her. Then she stood up, washed her face, and went down to the library. He was already there, at the long window behind his desk, his back to the door. A fire burned low in a grate large enough to roast a calf. She closed the door behind her, and at the sound of the latch, he turned. In daylight, he looked older than he had in the candlelight, but his eyes, when they came to her, were the warmer gray she had glimpsed the night before. "Miss Koval, you are still here." "Yes." "Have you decided?" "Yes. I will accept your offer. On 3 conditions." The smallest movement of his head, a surprise so faint it could almost have been missed. "Name them." "First, I will not be paid in promises. The sum you have spoken of, half of it I ask, be settled in writing, in a letter you sign and seal, and lodged with a solicitor of my naming in Hartleyford, before the visit begins. The letter to be released to me upon the departure of your aunt and her party, regardless of the outcome. Whether or not you marry, whether or not Mr. Hollincourt finds what he came to find, whether or not I please you." He inclined his head. "Second, I will lie for you, but I will not lie to you. If I see something I believe you should know, I will tell you. The arrangement breaks the moment you ask me to keep a thing from you for your comfort. Agreed. Third. She hesitated, only for a breath. When this is over, I will leave Ravenmore. I will not stay on as a servant in this house. You will give me, along with the sum, a letter of character that does not refer to any of this. And I will go, and I will not return, and neither of us will speak of any of it again. She said the last sentence too quickly. She did not know, herself, why it had cost her something to say. He was looking at her very steadily. All three I accept. Your Grace, you hesitated before the third. I did not. You did. You may keep the reason. I do not ask it. But I have noticed, and I will tell you that I have noticed, because I will not lie to you either. That is my condition in return. She looked at him. She thought, this is the part where I should be afraid. She was not. Then we have an agreement, Your Grace. He crossed to the desk, took a pen, and wrote 3 lines on a slip of paper. He blotted it, folded it, and held it out to her. The name of the solicitor in Hartleyford. He was my mother's man before he was anyone else's. Take this to him today. Yarrow will arrange the carriage. When you return, the letter we discussed will already be in his keeping. She took the slip. Her fingers, brushing his, did not tremble. His did. She noticed. She said nothing. She moved to the door. With her hand on the latch, she paused, because there was one more thing. Not a condition, only a question, that she had not been able to leave at the threshold. Your Grace, the young woman who is being brought here. What is her name? He did not turn from the window. Her name is Lady Iselin Vane, and you will know her, Miss Covell, from her hands. She wears a thin gold ring on the smallest finger of her left hand. It belonged, once, to her aunt, her mother's elder sister, who died when Lady Iselin was a child. He paused. That aunt, he said very quietly, was the woman in the painting. The door clicked shut behind Mireille before she remembered that she had opened it. The carriage ride to Hartleyford passed in a daze. 6 miles of bare hawthorn hedges, of stone-walled fields, of a small gray church whose bell tower leaned a little to the south. Mireille watched the country pass and tried to think of nothing at all. She could not. Her mind kept returning to the Duke's voice, saying that Aunt was the woman in the painting. The girl arriving in 4 days to be presented to him as a possible wife was wearing the ring of the woman he had once loved. Mireille suspected, with a heaviness that surprised her, that the Duke's aunt knew exactly, and had chosen the ring as carefully as a general chooses ground. Mr. Brent's chambers were on the upper floor of a narrow stone house in the Cathedral Close. Mr. Brent himself proved to be a small, neat, white-bearded man of perhaps 70, with very blue eyes behind very small spectacles. His Grace's letter arrived an hour ago by his own messenger. I will read the substance of it aloud. You will sign your acknowledgement, and it will be lodged in this safe. He read. The sum was very large indeed, half deposited at once into an account in her name at a bank in Hartleyford, the remaining half held in trust, pending the conclusion of her service. There was a clause regarding her father, establishing a separate and irrevocable annuity for the term of his natural life, beginning at once. There was a clause specifying that no part of the sum was contingent upon any personal favor, intimacy, or compliance whatever. The last clause undid her. He had wanted her to know that he had thought of it, and refused it, before she ever had the chance to fear it. She signed her acknowledgement. At the door, Mr. Brent stopped her. Miss Covell, I have served the family of Ravenmore for 41 years. I do not give counsel that has not been asked for, and I will not give it now. But I will say this. It is the first letter of its kind he has ever written. Be very careful with him. He is more breakable than he looks." She had no answer for that. She nodded and left. When she returned to Ravenmoor, the house had already begun to change. 2 grooms she had not seen before were beating the dust out of carriage rugs that had hung untouched for years. From the open windows of the long drawing room came the smell of beeswax and the sound of Mrs. Pell's voice directing the laying of fires in rooms that had not been opened since Mireille came to the house. She climbed to her new room and found, on the small writing desk, a folded sheet of paper in the same elegant hand. "Miss Coville. At 7 this evening, please attend me in the small library. We have much to do. R.R." It was the smallest possible piece of him, and he had given it to her in a note that anyone might intercept. She thought he had not done it carelessly. The afternoon passed in a blur. Yarrow walked her through the parts of the house that were now hers to manage. The east wing, 5 guest bedchambers, the conservatory, cold and full of dead orange trees, the long gallery with its row of family portraits that had been turned face to the wall and which were now to be turned back. All but 2, Yarrow said. He did not say which 2. She did not ask. At 7 exactly, she went down. The small library lay beyond the great one, narrower, lined with maps as much as with books, warmer, with a fire built up high, and 2 armchairs drawn close to it. The Duke rose when she entered. He did so the way a man rises for a guest. He poured her tea without asking how she took it, strong, with a small splash of milk, exactly as she preferred. She thought he had asked Yarrow. He turned to the papers on the table. "Tomorrow morning, Mrs. Pell will assemble the staff, and I will speak to them. I will tell them the surface only, the aunt's visit, your elevation. I will not mention Hollincourt's intentions." He turned a paper toward her. "These are the names of every guest expected, and the order in which they will arrive. You will memorize it tonight. We will burn it before we leave this room." She read. The aunt was first, hostile but proud. Watch her hands at table. She taps the rim of her glass when she has decided to act. The young woman, Lady Iselin Vane, 21. Of better understanding than her aunt credits, has been told nothing of the painting or its history. Her ring will be visible at all times. Do not look at it. Hollincourt himself, charming, will praise me extravagantly to my face and write to London nightly. 2 further guests, neighbors of standing, a Sir Cassian Arger and his sister, Miss Persephone Arger. The brother, harmless. The sister, observant. We will need to be very careful with Miss Arger. Your Grace, why must we be careful with Miss Arger? Because she was at one time expected to marry my elder brother, before he was killed. Ah, she memorized. When she had finished, he gathered the papers and fed them one by one to the fire. Only then did he speak again, and now his voice was different. Quieter. "Miss Coville, there is one further thing I will ask of you, not as part of our arrangement. You may refuse it." "Yes. During the visit, when no one else is present, I will ask you to address me by my Christian name. The arrangement requires that we speak privately and often. Your address as Your Grace in those private moments will mark you, to anyone who overhears, as exactly what you are. A servant, a spy." She did not say anything. "My name is Roderick Mearcy. Mearcy was my mother's name. I took it as my own when my elder brother died, and I came into the title. It is the name I was called by my mother, by my brother, and by 2 others. You will be the 3rd in 8 years to speak it. I am asking it of you. You may say no." "Roderick," she said. It came out before she had meant to test it. It came out softly. Her own voice surprised her. "Yes," he said. Like that. Outside, the long case clock in the great hall struck 8. She did not know it then, but a woman she had not yet met was at that moment standing in the courtyard of the inn at Hartleyford, asking after the road to Ravenmoor, and her name was Persephone Ardure. She had come early. The note arrived at 9:30 the following morning. "Miss Coville, I am, as I am sure you will discover within the hour, not expected. I have arrived 2 days before my brother and our cousins. I do not require ceremony. I will, however, require the particular attention of His Grace at the earliest moment that can be contrived without embarrassment to the house. I have long understood that I will have to fight for every moment of his time during this visit, and I have resolved to begin early. Yours, etc., Persephone Ardure." In the front hall stood a tall woman of perhaps 35, in a traveling cloak of dark plum wool, her dark hair pinned in a style 10 years too plain to be fashionable, and exactly severe enough to be remembered. She had Mireille's measure before Mireille had reached the bottom of the stairs. "You will be the new companion." "Miss Coville, ma'am." "Yes," a small civil smile. "Yarrow has just been telling me. I confess it is the first I have heard of the position. How interesting." When refreshment had been ordered, and they were briefly alone, Persephone said, in a voice quite different from the one she had used before, "I will not deceive you, Miss Coville. I have come early because I wish to see what kind of house this is now, before the rest of the party is here to perform their parts in it. I am not your enemy. I am not yet your friend. Tell me, are the portraits in the long gallery still turned to the wall?" Mireille's heart climbed into her throat. "Some of them, ma'am. Most have been turned back. His Grace gave the order yesterday." "The second from the end on the south side. Has it been turned?" Mireille had not yet been into the long gallery. "I do not know, ma'am. I will inspect it before I bring you up to your room." "Do that. And tell me. I will not ask His Grace. I will ask you." "Ma'am, may I ask why?" Persephone's eyes were a very pale brown, almost amber, and there was, behind them, a steadiness that Mireille had not encountered in any other face since she had come to this house except the Duke's own. "Because I am the only person now living who painted that portrait, and I would like to know whether he intends, this fortnight, to make himself remembered or to bury himself a little further. I hope for the first." "I will look for you, ma'am." The Duke arrived 3 minutes later. He bowed over Persephone Ardure's hand, with a courtesy that wasn't warm, but was not cold either. "Miss Ardure, you are welcome at Ravenmoor." "Your Grace, I am sorry to have come early." "You are not." "No," she said, with a small, odd smile. "I am not." They spoke for half an hour. On the surface, it was a perfectly civil conversation. Beneath the surface, it was something quite different. Persephone Ardure was testing him, not cruelly, carefully, asking him questions whose answers she already knew, watching to see how he held them. He passed every test. He answered each question with the minimum of words and a face like polished stone. At the end of half an hour, Persephone rose, offered him her hand, said, "I should like to rest before luncheon." And in the moment of releasing his hand, she added, with no change in her tone whatever, "I am very glad to see you, Roderick." He said, "Thank you, Persephone." That was all. But Mireille saw, in the small fraction of a second between the words, saw something move across his face that he could not stop in time. It was the face of a man who had just been called by a name he had not been called by in a long time, and had not realized, until the moment it was spoken, how much he had missed the sound of it. At the door of her chamber she paused. "Miss Coville, you are very careful with him." "Ma'am, I am only—" "No, you are very careful. And that is an observation, not an accusation. There is a difference between caring for a man's comfort and caring for the man. You are doing the second. He has not had it in a very long time. I am glad of it. Do not let my aunt see it. She closed her door. Mireille went directly to the long gallery. 23 portraits hung along its inner wall. 22 had been turned face out. The second from the end, on the south side, was still turned to the wall. She leaned closer to read the small label on the back of the stretcher in faded ink. Lieutenant Lord Talvas Mercy of the 18th Foot. Painted at Camp Veleur, the spring before he was killed. By P. Ardour, from Life. Mireille put her hand to her mouth. She understood several things at once. Persephone Ardour had not only nearly married the Duke's elder brother, she had painted him. The woman now resting upstairs had loved that brother, and had been left a widow before being a wife, and had carried his face in her hand for 12 years. The Duke, in turning that portrait to the wall, had not been hiding his brother from himself. He had been hiding his brother from her. She found Yarrow and asked where she might find his Grace. He was in the inner library. She told him. His face did not change. He said, very quietly, "Have I turned it back?" "No, Your Grace." "Have you told her so?" "No. I came to you first." He went to the window. He did not look out. "Turn it back, Mireille. Have it done before luncheon. And tell her so when she asks. It is past time. It is long past time. I have made her wait the length of a war." "Yes." She turned to leave. At the door he spoke again, his voice rougher than he had let her hear before. "Mireille, thank you." She did not turn around. She did not trust her face. She left the room, gave the order to Tabitha Reeve in a voice that did not shake, and watched while the second portrait from the end on the south side was lifted from its hook, turned, and rehung. The long-dead face of Lieutenant Lord Talvas Mercy looked out at the gallery again, after all this time. He had his brother's eyes. He was smiling, a soldier's smile, half wry, half tired, for the woman holding the brush. The Duke sent his apologies to luncheon, estate business, and Mireille presided alone with Persephone Ardour. When Mireille told her the portrait had been turned, Persephone did not speak for a full half-minute. She set down her spoon. She looked out at the bare lawn. When she turned back, her eyes were dry and very bright. She said only, "Thank you, Miss Covell. That was kind of him." She went up at 6 o'clock to dress for dinner. A brief note had been slipped under her door that afternoon. She would be expected at dinner each evening for the duration of the visit, seated at the Duke's request near the head of the table. The note included a second line. "If you have any concern about the propriety of this, please send word. His Grace wishes you to know that he has thought of it, and that he will defend the arrangement." She had not sent word. The third dress was the one for evening, a soft, deep dove-gray silk with a high collar and very plain long sleeves. Tabitha had brushed and pinned her hair an hour before with hands that moved as though they had been doing this work for 30 years, which they had not. She wanted, briefly and absurdly, her mother, not for advice, of which her mother had been chary, but for the small, dry observation her mother had always managed when something was about to happen that no one had quite expected. "Hold your shoulders down. Hold your tongue still." She held her shoulders down. She went down to the small drawing room at 5 minutes to 7. The Duke turned and looked at her, and for 1/4 of a second forgot to put his face on. It was the second time she had seen him forget. He covered it more quickly this time. It was a very strange meal. 3 of them at a table laid for 16. The candles had been lit only at the head, so that beyond a certain point, the long polished wood of the table simply receded into a watching darkness. They spoke of ordinary things. The Roman road that ran beneath the South Meadow, the particular character of Hartleyford cheese. Then, with the second remove, Persephone set down her glass. Roderick, I have decided to be honest with you. Aunt Lavinia has written to my brother, without my knowledge, asking him to support her in a particular plan. He showed me the letter this morning. She intends, while she is here, to put it to you that you are not fit to choose a wife for yourself. The candidate is Iselin. What you do not know is that she has written ahead to Mr. Hollencourt, asking him to assemble such observations of your conduct as might support a petition for the appointment of a curator over the estate, on grounds of unfitness. The Duke was very still. I know. You know. I have known for 3 weeks. It is why this house has been opened. It is why Miss Coville sits at this table. I am asking you now to take the same side. I will, Roderick. Of course I will. Did you doubt I would? I did not know whether I had the right to ask it. You had the right 12 years ago, and you have it now. After dinner, Persephone suggested they all three go up to the long gallery, since the moon was full. They walked the length of it in something that was not quite silence, Persephone naming each portrait quietly as they passed, the names of the dead like a private litany, and at the second from the end, on the south side, they stopped. Persephone stood for a long time in front of the painting of the man who had been her almost husband. The Duke stepped back to give her the space. When she at last lifted her hand and touched the lower corner of the frame, a small, ordinary gesture of recognition, there was nothing in it but the long, plain weight of having loved someone. Thank you for turning him back, Roderick. It was past time. She walked alone down the gallery toward her room. For a long time he did not speak. Then he said, "There is one more thing, Mireille, that I should have said and did not. There is a letter behind the books in the small library, behind the Plutarch on the third shelf from the top. I have not read it in 8 years. It is from the woman in the painting. Her name was Aurelle Vane. She was Lady Iselin's aunt, her mother's elder sister, and we were to have been married the autumn after my brother's regiment was due to come home. He did not come home. She did not survive the winter that took him. There was an illness in her household. I had been a surgeon, briefly, before my brother's death made me what I am. It was not enough. I could not save her." He paused. "I am asking you now to read it for me, to tell me whether she forgave me. I have never been able to know." Mireille's throat had closed. When she could speak, she said, "Roderick, I will do whatever you ask. But I think you should read it. I think you have only been waiting for someone to be in the room when you did. I will be in the room. I will sit with you. I will not look at the page. But I think you should read it yourself." He stared at her. For a moment she thought she had overstepped. Then his face did something she would not afterward be able to describe. It was not relief. It was not gratitude. It was something stripped and human and very young. "Yes, all right." They went down to the small library together. He took down the Plutarch with hands that were not steady. There was, behind the volume, a thin sealed envelope yellowed at the edges. He sat down in the armchair by the fire, and she sat in the chair opposite, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she looked into the fire, not at him, and she said, "I will not move." He broke the seal. He read. It took him a long time. The fire ticked. Once she heard a small, sharp intake of breath from across the hearth that was not quite a sob. She did not lift her eyes. She had given him her word. When at last he folded the letter, his voice was hoarse but not broken. "She forgave me, Mireille. I am very glad, Roderick. She forgave me, and she asked me to do something, and I have not done it. She asked me to find someone to whom I could one day show the painting. She wrote that she had begun the painting for me and finished it for whoever should come after her, and that I was not to keep it covered. That a portrait covered is a kind of grave, and she had not given me her ring so that I might dig myself one. I have kept it covered all this long while. I have not, in this time, known a single creature to whom I could even imagine showing it, until 2 nights ago, when you put the cloth back without my asking. He did not reach for her hand. She did not reach for his. But she said, across the small space between the 2 armchairs, "Then when you are ready, Roderick, when you are ready, and not before, you will take the cloth down yourself, and I will be in the room. I will only be there. And then the painting will not be a grave any longer. It will only be a painting." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he said, very quietly, "You may go to bed, Mireille. It is late. Thank you." She rose. At the door, she paused. She had paused in this same room twice now, with her hand on the latch. And she understood, at last, that the pausing was a habit she was forming with him. She did not turn back. She did not yet know. She could not have known that down in the kitchen yard at that very moment, the underfootman called Reed was taking a folded paper from the hand of a stranger on a tired horse, and that the stranger had ridden hard from Hartleyford with the news that Mr. Hollencourt's carriage had been seen on the North Road, and would arrive at Ravenmoor not in 3 days, but at first light. The visit was beginning early. She had been asleep for less than 2 hours when Tabitha Reeve knocked at her door. "Miss, His Grace has sent for you. The gentleman has come." "What gentleman?" "Mr. Hollencourt, miss. He is in the front hall, with 3 servants and a great deal of luggage. His Grace says you are to come down at once." She came down at once. The plain dark wool, not the silk. She had had wit enough, even half asleep, to understand that this was not a moment for the silk. As she came down the great staircase, the gray light of first dawn was just beginning to find its way through the long windows of the front hall, and she could see, below her, the shape of the new arrival, a tall man in a many-caped traveling coat, supervising the unloading of a small mountain of trunks, while Yarrow stood beside him with a face like stone. The Duke was there, too. His coat was the same severe black, but his hair had been tied back hastily rather than dressed. He saw her on the stairs. His eyes went to hers. He did not nod. But she knew, as plainly as if he had said the words aloud, that he wanted her at his side. "Mr. Hollencourt, may I present Miss Covell? Miss Covell is my late mother's companion in waiting. She has been in the house only a fortnight, but she has, in that time, taken charge of the household for the duration of this visit." The man turned. He was perhaps 50, with a long, intelligent, slightly sorrowful face. The face of a man who has spent a great many years convincing other men that he was on their side. And his eyes, small, brown, very alert, went to Mireille with a swiftness that was almost a flick of a finger. "Miss Covell," he bowed. "I am charmed. I am also confused. I had been informed by my dear cousin Lavinia that the late Duchess's establishment had remained unfilled. It had, sir, until last week. How fortunate that the position should have been so suddenly remembered. It was His Grace's decision, sir." "Yes," said Mr. Hollencourt, "I am sure it was. He was not going to be a brutal man. He was going to be a charming one. The danger of him was that he would make her wish to be helpful. The Duke said, 'Miss Covell will see you to your rooms. We had thought to give you the blue chamber on the 2nd floor. It will suit very well. Then I will see you at breakfast, at 9:30. Miss Ardour will join us. She has come early. She was, like yourself, faster than her correspondence. Persephone. Mr. Hollencourt's brows lifted very slightly. How charming. I have not seen Miss Ardur in many years. 12, I think. 12. Yes. It took her 20 minutes to settle Mr. Hollencourt and his servants. He thanked her 3 times. He commented mildly that the house seemed to have been well kept in his Grace's seclusion. He asked her whether she was related to the Covels of Hartleyford. She said she was. He said, "Ah, of course, the clockmakers," and gave her another of his thin, perfectly civil smiles, and let her go. She came down the back stairs, feeling as though she had been weighed. The Duke was waiting at the bottom. He took her by the elbow, only for the smallest fraction of a second, and they went into the small library, and he closed the door, and stood with his back against it for a long moment, his eyes shut. He was not supposed to come for 3 days. I know. He has come early because he means to find what is here before we are ready for him to find it. I know, Roderick. He opened his eyes. I have been afraid for 8 years. Then you have practice, she said. It was the wrong thing to say, and it was the right thing. He laughed, one short, unwilling, almost soundless laugh, and then he passed his hand briefly across his face. Yes, I suppose I have. Go and rest for an hour, if you can. Breakfast will be a great deal harder than the front hall just was. She went up. She did not rest. She sat at the small writing desk in her room and wrote out every detail she had so far observed of Mr. Hollencourt, his manner of entering a room, the small purse mouth he had made when she said the words, His Grace's decision, the precise instant his attention had sharpened when the Duke had named Persephone Ardur. Breakfast lasted 90 minutes. Mr. Hollencourt was very charming. He told 3 anecdotes of mutual London acquaintances, which Persephone Ardur responded to with a precision that suggested she had been waiting 12 years for exactly this opening. He admired, with a soft sigh, the portrait over the sideboard. The late Duchess, is it not, Your Grace? I had forgotten how like you she was about the eyes. And the Duke said evenly, Yes, my mother, and the conversation moved on. Only Mireille, watching him, saw that the Duke had not for 1 second touched his coffee since the moment Mr. Hollencourt had said the word forgotten. Toward the end of the meal, however, Mr. Hollencourt did find a crack. He found it in her. Miss Coville, you said you had been in the house a fortnight, and you came from a position in another house. From a position, sir, with a Mrs. Allardyce in Hartleyford, a widow. Her husband was a magistrate. And how came you, from Mrs. Allardyce's establishment, to find your way to Ravenmore? I answered an advertisement, sir, in the Hartleyford Mercury, for a housemaid. For a housemaid. Yes, sir, the smallest pause. And from a housemaid's place, Miss Coville, in a fortnight, you have risen to be a companion in waiting. Yes, sir. How extraordinary. It surprised me also, sir. He smiled at her. It was a very kind smile. She did not breathe. Forgive my curiosity, Miss Coville. The house is in good order, and you are evidently equal to the position. I meant no impertinence. None taken, sir. The conversation moved on. Across the table, very briefly, she met Persephone Ardur's eyes. Persephone gave her, with no movement of any feature in her face whatever, the smallest possible nod. When breakfast at last ended and they rose, Mr. Hollencourt paused beside the Duke and said in a voice low enough not to carry, Your Grace, I should say, while I have a moment, Cousin Lavinia and the young lady will not be with us today after all. There has been some small carriage trouble. They have stopped at the inn at Stenley and will not arrive until tomorrow. It is no inconvenience, sir. He bowed. He left the breakfast room. The Duke turned to Mireille. He has come ahead of them on purpose. Yes. He has a full day and a night in the house alone before they arrive. He will spend the day finding what he can find, and tonight he will go through the house. Then tonight, she said, we will be there before him. She did not stop moving for 1/4 of an hour together that day. Mr. Hollencourt walked the south meadow with the Duke in the late morning. Persephone Ardure, who had a gift for putting herself exactly where she was most useful and looking as though she had drifted there by accident, contrived to walk with them for the second half of the hour and to engage Mr. Hollencourt afterward in the conservatory on the subject of the dead orange trees, which she had decided to attempt to revive personally. Mireille used the time. She went with Yarrow through every room on the 2nd and 3rd floors of the East Wing and made certain there was nothing in any of them that could be made to mean anything by a man determined to make things mean. She had the locked oak door unlocked, the corridor aired, the still room emptied of every paper and trunk, the brass-bound trunk carried down to the cellar and put behind a wall of preserves. Only one thing remained: the portrait, still under its gray cloth. The Duke had not yet given his consent for it to be moved, and she had given her word that she would not lift the cloth. After luncheon, Mr. Hollencourt asked, with the same mild courtesy, whether he might have the freedom of the house. The Duke had no reasonable choice. Refusal would have been the very first crack. He gave it, and sent Yarrow to walk with him, with strict instructions not to leave the man alone for a single minute. But Mireille, who had spent the afternoon moving from window to window of the upper floors, had noticed something else. Twice during the afternoon, the underfootman called Reed had passed beneath the kitchen yard wall at moments when he had no business there, once with a folded paper in his hand, once empty-handed, going the other way. She told the Duke at 6 o'clock. He listened. Then we have until midnight at the outside. He has been told something this afternoon. He will act on it tonight. It will be the East Wing. Yes. Rideau has been in this house for 11 years. He may know more than we think. The Duke was silent. What do you wish to do? She said. He looked at her for a very long moment. The fire had burned down to a steady glow. I wish to take it down, Mireille. She did not, for a second, understand. Then she did. The cloth. The cloth. Tonight. Now. Before he comes. If he finds it under the cloth, it is a secret. If he finds it on the wall, it is only a portrait. There is no shame in a man having had a younger face. There is no shame in a man having loved a woman who died. There is shame only in his hiding it. I have kept it covered out of cowardice. I will not have his hand on the cloth. Then come with me. They went up. The corridors were quiet. They took the back stairs and a single candle. The door of the still room stood ahead. She unlocked it. She stood aside. He went in. He stood for a moment in the doorway, looking at the painting under its cloth, and she saw his shoulders rise once on a long, indrawn breath. Then he stepped in. He set the candle on the desk, and he turned to face the canvas, and he did not move for a count of perhaps 10. He said, without looking at her, "Stay at the door, Mireille. You said you would not look. I do not need you to look. I only need you to be in the room." I am in the room. Thank you. He reached up. He took the upper edge of the cloth between his hands. He drew it down slowly in a single steady movement that did not falter even when, halfway through, his shoulders shook briefly with the effort of not making any sound. The cloth came free. He folded it once. He set it on the chair beside the desk. She did not look at the painting. She kept her eyes on the floor of the doorway. He spoke, after a while, very quietly, not to her. Aurel. That was all. Just the name, the sound of it in the room, said for the first time in this long while. Mireille felt it pass her, where she stood at the door, and she did not lift her eyes, and she did not move. He stood with the painting another minute or two. Then he said, his voice ragged but quite his own, "All right, we will go down." She lifted her eyes only when he had stepped past her into the corridor. She closed the stillroom door behind him. The painting hung now uncovered on the wall. What she could not yet have known was that as they descended the back stairs together, 2 floors below them, Mr. Hollencourt's valet was walking very softly down the corridor of the bachelor's wing with a small ring of skeleton keys in his pocket, on his master's instructions. And in the front hall, also unknown to either Mireille or the Duke, a carriage had just drawn up 2 hours ahead of its expected time. A footman was dismounting. A small, sharp-faced spaniel was leaping from the carriage step into the gravel, and the door was opening to reveal the Honorable Mrs. Lavinia Hollencourt Marchais in a great fur-trimmed traveling cloak, pulling on her gloves, and behind her, descending in her aunt's wake with her left hand bare, so that the thin gold ring on the smallest finger caught the carriage lamp, was Lady Iselin Vane. The aunt and the candidate had also come early. When Yarrow's knock came at the library door, the Duke rose at once. He did not look frightened any longer. He looked very tired, and very awake, and very calm. "We will go down together, Mireille. You will walk in beside me, not behind me, beside," she said. "Yes." And they went. The Honorable Mrs. Lavinia Hollencourt Marchais was a small woman. This was the first thing Mireille noticed about her, and the most surprising. She had built her up, over 2 days of preparation, into a creature of great physical presence, broad-shouldered, hawk-eyed, an iron-gray general in skirts. The woman in the front hall was none of these things. She was barely above 5 feet. Her hair beneath the bonnet was a delicate ash brown. Her eyes were a mild, round, almost girlish blue. She had the kind of face one sees in miniatures of forgotten beauties. Pretty, nearly sweet. The hardness placed so carefully behind the prettiness that only on second glance could it be seen at all. Lady Iselin Vane stood half a step behind her aunt's shoulder, very straight, very pale, with the calm, guarded face of a young woman who had been told a great many things on the journey and had not yet decided how many of them she was going to believe. "Roderick. Aunt. You will forgive the lateness. My niece was anxious to be settled, and you, Roderick, will introduce me to the young woman I have not been told about. Aunt, may I present Miss Mireille Coville, my late mother's companion in waiting. How charming. My nephew has not had a companion in waiting in this house in 9 years. You must be a young woman of unusual qualifications. I am very sensible of His Grace's confidence, ma'am. I am sure you are." The whole arrival was concluded in some 5 or 6 minutes, and at the end of those minutes, Mireille stood with the Duke in the empty front hall. "She has already decided," he said quietly. "Yes." "Mireille, whatever she does tonight or tomorrow, you are not to answer her. You are to refer her to me, even if she says something to you alone. I promise, Roderick." She did not keep the promise. The aunt found her at 11:30 that night. Mireille had gone up to her room after a strained, brilliantly polite dinner, during which the aunt had been charming. Lady Iselin had been silent. Mr. Hollencourt had been thoughtful. Persephone Ardour had been observant, and the Duke had been perfect. She had not even reached the buttons at her throat when the soft tap came at her door. A single tap, quick and decisive. She opened the door and found the aunt standing in the corridor in a wrapper of pale rose silk with a candle in her hand. "Miss Coville, forgive me. I cannot sleep. May I come in for a moment? I should so like a quiet word." There was no possible way to refuse. The aunt came in. She set the candle on the small writing desk, and the candlelight came up from below into her face and made her look, for a strange, unguarded second, like a much older woman. "My dear, I will not insult either of us by pretending. You are a young woman who was a housemaid in this house a fortnight ago, and who is now being seated at the head of my nephew's table. I do not blame you. Young women in your position do as they are bid, and you have been bid, evidently, very particular things, by a man who has not been in his right mind for the better part of a decade. I do not blame you. I blame him. And I am here to spare you a very great deal of unhappiness, which is otherwise about to come down on your head. Mireille said nothing. You are a clockmaker's daughter from Hartleyford. Your father is ill. My nephew has no doubt said certain things to you, which he meant kindly at the time, and which he will, when he comes back to himself, regret. He is not a cruel man. He is a wounded one. The wounded are not safe people to be loved by, my dear. Ma'am, I have promised his grace. I imagined he would have asked that of you. Tell me, my dear, has he yet shown you the painting? The world stopped. Mireille did not move. She did not blink. She did not, she was certain, alter the smallest muscle of her face. But the aunt, looking at her in the candlelight, smiled a small private smile, and Mireille knew that she had given, by being too still, exactly the answer the aunt had come for. He has. Ma'am, I do not know what painting. Yes, you do. The painting is a sign that he has begun to confide. In a fortnight. Do you know how many years it took me? Ma'am, he has not loved you, child. He has confided in you, which is not the same thing, though it can feel the same to a young woman who has never been confided in before. He has shown you the painting because you have allowed him to see, in your face, what he has not been allowed to see in any face for nearly a decade. He will, when he marries my niece, miss you for some short while. Then he will not leave while you are still the woman in his memory, and not the woman who stayed and watched him forget. The aunt picked up her candle. I will not press you tonight. I will give you until breakfast to consider. I should add, however, that if you do not go, I will be obliged to inform certain persons whom Mr. Hollincourt has been gathering for some weeks that the present Duke of Ravenmore has so far departed from himself as to install a former housemaid in his late mother's establishment within a fortnight of her engagement. Such a letter in the hands of a court of chancery will undo him. I would prefer not to write it. She left. She closed the door behind her with the smallest, most polite click. Mireille stood in the middle of the room. She did not cry. She did not sit. She thought, with the cold clarity that had visited her once before at her mother's bedside, when she had understood that there were no further treatments left, that the aunt was right about one thing only, and the right thing was the thing that mattered. Whatever the aunt had said about love or memory, and Mireille did not believe a word of it, had felt sitting at the library fire with him while he read a long buried letter the truth of what was between them. Whatever she had said about that, the aunt was right about the letter. By being in this house, Mireille had already given them the weapon. The longer she stayed, the heavier it would grow. She sat down at the writing desk and wrote one letter. Roderick, I am going home. The thing your aunt said to me tonight in this room is not what is taking me away. Forgive me for not being clearer. I cannot be. You were right that you could not afford to be loved while she is in this house. I should have understood it sooner. I am very glad I was in the room when you took the cloth down. You are not what they say you are. You are not what you think you are either. Please be careful of Mr. Hollincourt's man Wells. He was at the keys of the bachelor's wing tonight. Yours, my son. She sealed it. She laid it on the bed. She did not lie down. She sat in the chair by the unlit fire and waited for the first gray to come in at the window. When it did, she rose. She put on her plainest cloak and packed her small bag with the few things she had brought to Ravenmore, leaving everything that had not been hers when she came. She went down by the back stairs. She slipped out into the gray before dawn of the kitchen yard. The frost was sharp. She walked down the long drive between the bare avenues of limes. She did not look back. At the gatehouse, she was met, to her great surprise, by Yarrow. He was standing in his greatcoat with the gatehouse keeper's old pony cart hitched behind him. "I will drive you to Hartleyford myself, Miss Covell. It is not yet 7 o'clock. She did not ask how he had known. She thought, looking at the old steward's tired face, that he had simply known. He had been waiting 40 years to drive someone away from Ravenmoor without their having to walk. The pony moved. The gatehouse fell behind. The gray winter fields opened ahead. She did not, the whole long road, look back. But once, halfway to Hartleyford, when a hare started up out of the hedge and crossed the road in front of the pony, she pressed her hand against her mouth and made one sound. Only one. And Yarrow, beside her, did not turn his head, and did not speak, and only, after a moment, very quietly, handed her his clean handkerchief without looking at her. She took it. She did not give it back. He did not go after her at once. This, she would learn afterward, had not been from coldness. It had been because Yarrow, on returning to the house at noon, had walked directly into the library and laid Mireille's letter on the desk in front of him. "Read it twice, Your Grace, then read it 3 times. Then act." The Duke read it twice, then 3 times, then a 4th. He stood up and rang for Persephone Ardor. She came in within 5 minutes. He laid the letter open in front of her. She read it. When she had finished, she said simply, "Lavinia." "Yes." "What did she offer her?" "I do not yet know. I will ask her, in front of a witness. You, if you will do it." "Of course." "And then?" "Then I'm going to do something which will cause my aunt to leave this house before sunset, and Hollincourt with her. Persephone, will you stand at my shoulder while I do it? I have been waiting 12 years to stand at your shoulder while you did something, Roderick. Do it." The Duke summoned the household to the front hall at 3 o'clock. He summoned, in addition, his aunt, Lady Iselin Vane, Mr. Hollincourt, Persephone Ardor, and Sir Cassian Ardor, Persephone's brother, who had arrived an hour earlier with his gout and his good nature, a witness who could not be accused of partiality. Yarrow was there. Mrs. Pell was there. Tabitha Reeve was there. The whole machinery of Ravenmoor stood ranged along the walls of its own front hall and watched its master come down the great staircase with a folded gray cloth in one hand and a thin sealed envelope in the other. He stopped on the 3rd stair from the bottom. He did not raise his voice. "My aunt spoke last night, in the room of a young woman in my household, words intended to drive that young woman from this house. She succeeded. The young woman left at first light. It is in her letter that I learned, as the writer was being driven away from my own door by my own steward, that my aunt has prepared, with the cooperation of Mr. Hollincourt, who is at this moment her guest beneath my roof, to bring against me a petition of unfitness in the Court of Chancery, for the purpose of removing the management of this estate from my hand and placing it in hers." A small sound went through the household. Mrs. Hollincourt Marchais did not move. "I have known of this petition for 3 weeks. I had hoped Mr. Hollincourt would, in 2 weeks beneath my roof, find me sufficiently in possession of myself to render the petition unattractive. I should have acted. I am acting now." He came down the last 3 steps. He turned to his aunt. "Aunt Lavinia, you are welcome to remain at Ravenmoor for as long as you wish. I will not put you out of any house of mine. I will only say that I will not, while you remain here, present myself as a man to be married off, to be managed, or to be petitioned against. Your niece is welcome in this house as long as she wishes to stay. She has my deep apology for the use to which she has been put. Lady Iselin, if at any time you wish to be returned to your home with my full apology to your father, you have only to send word." Lady Iselin Vane, very pale, very straight, said clearly, "Thank you, Your Grace." "Mr. Hollincourt, you will leave this house before sunset. You will be given by Mr. Brent of Hartleyford, before the close of business this day, a sum representing the entire arrears of the small annuity which my late father, in his will, settled upon you. The arrears are not in arrears. The sum is a gift, and it is conditional. The condition is that, upon receipt, you will withdraw any petition or contemplated petition against my fitness, and you will not file another in your lifetime." Mr. Hollincourt opened his mouth, closed it. "Your Grace, I understand you. I accept it. Thank you." He turned then, away from his aunt, away from the assembled household, and he climbed the great staircase again, with the folded cloth in his hand. He did not stop on the third stair this time. He went up. He passed along the long gallery. He crossed to the carved oak door and unlocked it himself, and went through, and went to the still room. The painting hung, as Mireille had left it, uncovered on the wall. He took it down himself. It was not a small painting. He carried it down the corridor and down the back stairs. The household, watching from the hall below, as he came into view above the great staircase with the painting in his arms, made the second small sound of the afternoon. A single, long, indrawn breath of some 30 pairs of lungs. He came down the stairs slowly. He was holding it the right way around, so that, as he descended, every member of the household and every guest below saw, before they saw his face, the face of the young man in the green coat. He carried the painting through the front hall. He carried it past his aunt, who did not turn her head. He carried it past Mr. Hollincourt, whose mouth had gone very small and tight. He carried it into the long drawing room, where there was a wall that had been empty for 9 years. He set the green-coated portrait on the floor, below the empty space. He turned to the household. "This will be hung here before tomorrow morning. It is a portrait of myself, painted some 9 years ago by a friend, whose name is on the back of the canvas. It is of no political importance. It is of no scandalous nature. It hangs here because it is a picture of a member of this family, and members of this family hang on the walls of this house. It has hung for 8 years in a closed room because I hadn't, until this week, the strength to look at it. I have it now. I would like it on my own wall." He paused. "Yarrow, find me someone who can hang it before nightfall." "It is already arranged, Your Grace." "Of course it is." The Duke turned to Persephone Ardor. She nodded once. He nodded once back. Then he addressed the front hall. "I am going to Hartleyford. I will be back by tomorrow noon. In my absence, my steward and Miss Ardor are jointly empowered to give any order in this house. That is all." He left. He went to the stables himself. He took a horse, a tall bay he had not ridden in 3 years, and he rode out of the gate of Ravenmoor at a hard, steady pace. He arrived at the house above the clockmaker's shop in Hartleyford at 4:45 in the afternoon, in a winter dusk, with his horse blown and his hat in his hand. He knocked at the door himself. It was opened by an old man in a dressing gown, Mireille's father, who had clearly been ill for a long time, and who, on seeing the figure on his doorstep, had the wit to say, "You will be his Grace, then," in a voice of considerable amusement. "And my daughter, sir, is in the back parlor, crying into a handkerchief that does not belong to her. You may go through." The Duke went through. He stood in the doorway in his riding coat with his hat in his hand and the dust of the road on his boots, and he looked at Mireille, who had risen from her chair at the sound of the door, and he said, very simply, "Mireille, I have hung the painting on the wall in the long drawing room. I have come to ask you to come back, not as my mother's companion, not as anything we agreed at Ravenmoor, I have come to ask you to come back as the woman who was in the room with me when the cloth came down. I do not yet know what the world will allow that to be called. I do not very much care. I have written very fast, and I have very little dignity left. Please come home." She did not this time hesitate. She crossed the room. She stopped a foot from him. "Roderick, I will come. But I will come only if my father comes too, and only when he is well enough to be moved, and only into rooms in your house where he will not be ashamed to be moved. I will not be a secret you bring home, and I will not have him a charity." "Your father," said the Duke, with the smallest creak of a smile he had managed in 9 years, "will have the south-facing rooms above the conservatory, which were my mother's, and he will have, if he wishes, the run of every clock in Ravenmore, of which there are 41, and not one of them keeps proper time." From the doorway behind them, very dryly, Mr. Covell said, "41 clocks, sir, and not one of them proper. Daughter, I will accept his offer on his behalf if you do not." She laughed then. She laughed, and put her face for the briefest second against the Duke's coat. Only for a second, only long enough to feel the cold of the road still on the wool and the heat of him beneath it. And then she stepped back and said, "Then take us home, Roderick." He took them home. Not that night. Mr. Covell was not strong enough for a winter ride at dusk, but in the morning, in a closed carriage, with a great many blankets and a hot brick at her father's feet, and Maid beside him, and the Duke riding alongside on his tall bay, and the road from Hartleyford to Ravenmore running before them in the new, clear light of a winter morning that had, very surprisingly, not the smallest gray in it at all. A year later, on a summer afternoon, Mireille stood at the window of the long drawing-room of Ravenmore and watched her father in the garden, walking very slowly along the path between the espaliered pear trees, with a cane in one hand and a small brown spaniel at his heel. Behind her, on the wall above the fireplace, the painting hung where it had hung since the night the Duke had carried it down the stairs. The man in the green coat was not gone. He had not been replaced. He had only, very slowly over the past year, walked down out of the painting and into the man she had married in the small chapel at Ravenmore on the first day of May, with Persephone Ardour standing as her witness, and Yarrow weeping, very politely, into a handkerchief he afterward refused to admit had ever been tear-marked. She had been given the gold ring at that wedding. It had been, of course, the same ring. Lady Iselin Vane had returned it to the Duke by the same carriage in which she had returned to her father, with a brief note. "Your Grace, I do not know whose this was, but I do not believe it was meant for me. Yours, with no ill feeling whatever, Ivoum." The Duke had given the ring to Mireille on the morning of the wedding, without telling her any of this. He had told her in the evening. She had wept at the thought of what that small, clean act of dignity had cost a girl of 21. She had said simply, "I would like to write to her." He had said, "Then write." And she had. And Lady Iselin had written back, and was, in fact, expected at Ravenmore in September, with her newly affianced, a Captain Pelham of the 21st, for a fortnight's stay. The aunt, against every prediction, had written within a fortnight of her departure to apologize, and had since been twice to dine. Mireille turned from the window. She crossed the drawing-room and stopped, as she still sometimes did, in front of the painting. She had asked her husband once whether he had ever considered having the hand at the canvas edge painted out. He had looked at her for a long time. Then he had said, "No." She finished the painting. "It is hers. We do not paint the dead out of their own work, Mireille. We hang the work, and we live beneath it." She had thought often, since then, that this was perhaps the truest thing he had ever said to her, and that she had not married a man in spite of his grief, but had married, in some way she had not yet found the words for, the man who had made of his grief a practice of not painting people out. In the library that evening, after dinner, he came to find her. He laid 2 letters on the small table between the 2 armchairs by the fire, one from Mr. Brent, one from Persephone Ardor, who had 3 months earlier accepted at last the small position the Duke had offered her, somewhere between a family historian and a steward of the Long Gallery. He sat down in the armchair he had sat in on the night they had taken the Plutarch from the shelf. "Roderick, I would like, when she comes in September, to take Iselin into the Long Gallery." "Yes." "And I would like, after that, to hang the brother's portrait in the Great Hall, where everyone will see him." "Yes." "And I would like sometime, when you are ready, and not before, I would like the painting from the long drawing room moved into our own rooms, not because it should be hidden again, because it is private. The household has lived a year beneath it. They do not flinch at it. It can come home to us now, if you like." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes, I would like that very much." That night, they took it down themselves. They carried it together, she at one end of the heavy frame, he at the other, up the great staircase, and along the first-floor landing, and into the small, private sitting room that adjoined their own chambers. They hung it together. They stepped back together. The man in the green coat smiled in candlelight for whoever the painter had not been able to see, and the painter, by now, was both of them and neither of them, and the portrait was simply a portrait at last, hanging on a wall in a room in a house where the people who lived had decided, against many odds, to be alive. He took her hand. "Mireille, thank you for being in the room." "Always, Roderick." The clocks of Ravenmoor, all 41 of them, restored over the past year by the slow, careful work of an old clockmaker in the south-facing rooms above the conservatory, struck the hour together for the first time in 9 years, the small, sweet clamor running through the corridors of the great house like a piece of music it had forgotten it knew. And so, dear listener, this is where I leave them, beneath a painting that was once a grave, in a house that has, against every prediction, come back to life. A grieving man who could not bear to look at the face he had been. A young woman who was paid to lie and chose, when it mattered, to tell the truth instead. An aunt who learned, very late, that not everyone in her family could be moved like a piece on a board. A friend who waited 12 years for a portrait to be turned back to the wall. And 41 clocks, all striking the same hour at last. If this story moved you, if you found yourself caring about these people, about a duke who could not look at a painting and a maid who saw him anyway, I would so love to know. Tell me, in the comments below, what was the moment for you when you knew Roderick was going to be all right? Was it the night he took the cloth down? The afternoon he carried the painting down the stairs? Or was it earlier, the moment he wrote his name as R at the bottom of a small private note, and trusted a young woman he had known 16 days to read it? If stories like this one, Regency romances about wounded people and the courage it takes to be seen, are the kind of story you'd like to keep me telling, please consider subscribing. Your presence in this small, quiet corner of the world is what makes it possible to keep building these houses and lighting these candles and turning these portraits, one by one, back to the wall. Thank you, with all my heart, for being here. Until the next story.